blown. Live, as far as I know.
Excellent. Well, welcome to With Thunder's Applause podcast, where two friends get together to discuss the news and events and ideas that will shape our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co-host and producer, Zach. What up?
Nothing much. And not only is the future uncertain in the ways that we normally talk about, the future of streaming and content creation for Wizards of the Coast related products is in question. But we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit later. That sets up actually an introduction to today's episode. Another Thursday episode. We're fucking around with trying to figure out a schedule where we get to do some fun stuff.
Yes. In addition to making ourselves sad.
In addition to the doom porn.
You know you love it.
Everybody loves some good disaster porn, for sure. As much as they love riot porn.
That's what it is. Women love murder porn. Men love disaster porn. You know what?
Fundamental.
I should get a grant for this.
Division of the sexes.
I should get a grant for this. Do some research.
At any rate, yeah. So we're just gonna do a quick news update. It's been flooding a lot in California, and I found a good picture gallery through Gasp, CNN. I thought we could just kind of roll through some pictures, show some folks who may tune into YouTube, but don't necessarily go searching out what's going on in California. I heard it's flooding, but that's all I know, right? And have some discussions too about California geography and the future. We've done an episode or 2 or 3 now on various disasters and hazards. And we discussed flooding and the potential for that. And believe we talked about the arc storm too. And so we'll get into this and discuss a little bit and maybe touch on what is known about that and whether or not this event is indeed the 1,000-year flood. I don't think it is.
No. My area is relatively unaffected.
Right. And each area of the state will be affected differently. So it'll allow us to do some geography because there's a pretty decent geographic distribution across the photographs in this.
I'm a little sad.
Blog essay. What about?
Well, my area doesn't have the greatest infrastructure. And so I was really hoping that, this would be the storm they said it would, and it would test the infrastructure, point out the flaws, perhaps get people up in arms, but it hasn't. There was a little bit of flooding in an underpass that goes underneath a railroad track, and that is the extent of how it has affected us.
Yeah, and that might be a viable mitigation strategy, is just have a plan in place to close that when it floods. Because we kind of got to get over this, pushing, trying to contain nature in a way for our convenience when we can just simply be like they do west of town here, where they just paint red lines. And
and they're if you can't see red lines.
If you can see the red lines, you could probably get across it. If you don't see the red lines, don't try and cross because the water's too deep. And they just accept that they close some roads. And I'll tell a quick story here in a minute. And on the second half of the show, we are going to talk about the Genesys dice system a little bit, kind of springboarding off of our discussion of Chat GPT and its use in creating stories, primarily for role-playing games, but you could use it for anything. A bouncing off point for movies if you want to get into writing movies or whatever. It's a useful tool. And we're going to talk a little bit about Genesys dice system. Do you want to, in a few sentences, summarize what we're going to do on the second half?
Second half, I'll go quickly over Wizards of the Coast's open gaming license changes, and then that'll help to springboard us into why we should be looking for alternatives that aren't owned by massive companies like Hasbro.
Agreed. Yeah. And a conversation about fucking market centralization, because it's not just in telecommunications and the defense industry. It's not just in your electric utilities. It's not, even in the phones you have access to, right? There's only a couple big phone suppliers, right? Apple, Samsung.
And even Yeah, and even talking about phone service, there's some that are smaller, but like they're riding on the backs of other ones. And at any given moment, those other companies could say, "No, you're out."
Mhm.
Yeah, your Mint Mobiles, your Metro PCSs, etc.
Precisely,
Yeah,
precisely. Yeah, and this market consolidation is just not limited to the things that everybody uses, but also affects niche markets like tabletop role playing games.
it's less of a niche these days, man. Fucking D&D has become massive. I mean, I don't know if it was because of or with the aid of shows like Critical Role or whatever, but like a lot of people are playing RPGs these days, whether it's D&D or something
I have
else.
some thoughts on that, but let's
Yeah,
maybe
let's talk
talk
about
about
flooding
gaming
first.
on the second half.
Yeah, I've already got the
Because
flooding page loaded up, so you can go ahead and run us through this.
fantastic. So you're getting my feed here.
You get in your feed, yeah.
Oh,
California's
yeah.
flooding. New
So
pictures.
this is a to introduce this, we just wanted to talk a little bit about the flooding. Um, Zach had mentioned that it's not really affecting you so much.
Right.
I was kind of looking around actually. I had a nice day today, met up with a friend, and we just wanted to check the roads out west of town.
Look at that. You have another friend.
My only other, we actually talked about me not having friends. That was one of our things we chatted about. Um, but at any rate, took a drive west of town to see which roads were closed and which were open, which we could have Googled easily, but we just wanted to drive around and see what the flooding looks like.
Yeah.
Um, and it's it's wet, but we haven't experienced a lot of serious consequences like some of these other communities. And you were saying you didn't either there in Fresno, correct?
No, very minor. Yeah. I mean, like around here up in the mountains, like there were some rock slides and landslides, but in this area, it's so
Mhm.
flat, it's hard for there to be any serious flooding.
Yeah, and it depends on your local topography, right? And it also
Yeah.
depends on if your like levees hold,
Right.
because
From one
because
end of Fresno to the other, there's like a 20-foot difference. It's very minor, very
yeah,
flat. Yeah.
I'm significantly higher than the Sacramento River and like significantly like 30, 40 feet higher. And then and plus it's just a massive amount of land between us.
Right.
And then also like local streams. The Lindo channel is like impressively full. Like
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie, but it's also still like a foot and a half below the banks, and we're talking about, it's I don't know how wide, but fairly wide. So there's a lot of volume that can fit. 1 foot is a significant amount when you stretch it across the whole
Yeah.
space.
I mean, I think it's like 30 or 40 feet across at most of the
I would
most
probably
points.
say
Yeah.
more than that in a lot of places.
Right. Right.
A couple hundred.
Out by the airport. Yeah. Easily.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Out there, that's significantly smaller but deeper channel. I'm talking about
Yeah.
Lindo channel.
Oh, my mistake. My mistake.
Yeah, yeah. No, 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 you're good. But anyway, and I'm not really at risk of flooding. I've done a risk assessment based on my soil profile.
Hmm.
It tells you your geologic history, right? Like how did soil form in my case deposit, um, and so you can tell the extent of flood by how deep the soils are near the channel.
Mm,
And I'm
yeah.
kind of almost at the far end of that,
Yeah.
so um, I'm not at risk at all. So I'm kind of coming into this photo essay also kind of
Yeah.
wanting to highlight places that it did affect and maybe have a conversation a little bit about California geography. So, without further ado, it's going to just be disaster porn.
Mm,
This kind of stuck out in my head. It's funny because it's not about geography, right? But it's
yeah.
about a social habit where, like, this woman, as the caption says, and this is, by the way, on CNN. You can check it out yourself.
Use the show links.
Obviously, a lot of these images are from Getty, and the credits are there on the website. But she's like packing, like, kind of, I mean, that might have sentimental value, but it's
Junk.
also on a wall, which means it's not at immediate risk of flood damage. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's got to have sentimental value. I don't think she would have taken the time if it didn't. It's probably grandma's mirror right there. It looks old.
Perhaps, but it just kind of in my mind when I was going through this earlier, I was like, oh, because I've been thinking a lot about disaster response
Yeah.
and stuff. And I'm like, critical like go bags and totes and things. So you have important papers, you have, food, water, means to cook and heat and keep yourself warm and all those other
Right.
things. And then I see somebody like packing mementos as
Massive
they're
mirror.
like threatened by floodwater, and I'm just like, we have no priorities, and we're not even prepared, like mentally prepared to walk away from it.
Right,
What do you think
right.
about that?
And I mean, well, yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the other stuff that's in the photo, you can see there's clearly a frame here. There's an ornate
Little
box.
box.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hopefully there's like food and water underneath all this, but I doubt it. And it looks like a truck to me. Maybe it's in the truck bed.
Yeah, it looks like a king cab,
Yeah,
or like
yeah.
a one of those trucks with like a mini bed on the
Yeah,
back.
so let's hope it's there. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe like in her head, she's packing the most valuable things, but value won't help you survive. I don't know.
Yeah, and
She's
then I
probably
mean,
she's probably well to do. She can run off her savings for a while.
maybe or maybe not. Like,
Yeah,
but the point is that possibly this individual, and I don't want to like call her out because it has her name, so I'll move
yeah.
to the next picture. But um, it's possible that it's they kind of expect institutions. Okay, the water will go away and everything will
Right,
be fine.
right.
So let's just take these things,
Yeah, the valuable
and
things.
they'll put me in a shelter. They'll give me food and water. Like I
Yeah,
don't need to worry about it. And that is the case for a lot of people,
right.
especially with a disaster like this, because it's not super widespread,
Mhm.
right? Um, Here's another picture of flooding in Planeta. I'm not sure where that is, but you can see the whole street is all flooded out.
Right.
Interestingly enough, that's a pattern I noticed when I was on a walk with my partner earlier this week, was that especially in the areas north of my house that have like really thin soils, so like there's
Mhm.
nothing to hold the water. So there's a lot of water sheeting. Um, and sometimes like any subsurface water will surface
Right.
because there's not a deep soil profile for it to be stored in.
Mhm.
And so all the streets are like several inches below all the houses. And I just thought it was an interesting urban design pattern that factors in this, right? So this is bad for a lot of people, but so far it doesn't appear that their houses are flooded out, really, just the
Right.
street vehicles, that kind of thing.
I mean,
Go
for the
ahead.
most part, it seems like city planning dictates that the roads are lower than the houses. The roads have drainage that lead to the sewer systems, and the sewer systems carry everything away. And they're
Right.
planning for probably 100-year flood at worst.
Right. That's also in Canada. Or maybe I said that already.
You did,
This is an Aptos, which is like Santa Cruz County, if I'm not mistaken. So like
which was also affected.
southern, yeah, southern part of the Redwood Coast, very for just south of the San Francisco Peninsula.
Mhm.
And actually, I think it's on the north end of the Monterey Bay. Um, and so they had considerable damage, mostly from storm surge. So I'm guessing that's what this is here. Here you can see damage from storm surge at the Santa Cruz Boardwalk, which you've been to.
Yes.
I did ayahuasca in the Aptos Mountains, but I never went to the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk.
I watched Clueless at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk.
Awesome.
Put it on a green
Um,
screen. Pretty cool.
um, Rescue worker carrying a dog in
Oh,
Merced, which is Merced is in
very
this
close to me.
very close, but
Yeah.
it's between Sacramento and Fresno. It's actually, I think, I want to say by distance is closer to Sacramento, but it's on the San Joaquin Delta,
Yeah.
or at the edge of the Delta. So there's all sorts of mountain streams. If people are unfamiliar, watch a video on it. Also, highly recommend, and we should put this in the show notes, bro.
Okay.
Ryan Hall, y'all, is a YouTube channel of a meteorologist that just said, fuck it, I don't want to work for the TV stations anymore.
Hmm.
Like, I'm just going to use this forecasting equipment and have my own friggin' show on YouTube. And it's fantastic. It's really concrete. The videos aren't too long, and you kind of get like a big forecast. And what I appreciate about his approach, instead of like your local news where it's like, oh, and then temperatures across, and they got these kind of interactive maps, but they're really just kind of showing weather's effect on a community or a region. Ryan Hall does like a whole North America. And so you can actually see how weather is made by forces interacting from the Pacific, from the Arctic, and from the Gulf. And it's really kind of fascinating. And you can watch his stuff on how this is happening. But
Linked.
Merced is at the edge of the delta, and so it
Mhm.
receives basically water from all the streams in the Sierra Nevada, which is where systems off the Pacific drop most of their moisture, which is why the Great Basin is a fucking desert. Do I have that right, my friend?
Yes, rain shadowing from the mountains basically causes the air to go up, cool down. It can't carry as much water. The water falls out before it gets up the Sierras, and that's why you have a huge desert on the other side of the Sierra.
Yeah. And here you have someone who still had their Christmas decorations up. Um,
I won't say they deserve this, but
no one deserves this. But
no, that's true.
also, as we're gonna discuss, maybe in this next picture, we can take a moment to discuss. This is the reality, right?
Yeah.
That's also in Merced, and then here you have a neighborhood in Merced.
We would not fare well if there were like truly a lot of rain because we have our garage is detached and our garage is at a low point and it actually floods with like minimal rain or when they overwater the grass, which they do a lot. And so like right now our garage is pretty moist at all points. We had to raise up some of our stuff to get it out out of the water.
Yeah, and that might be a strategy for a lot of people. I know my grandmother's basement flooded during high rain events.
Mhm.
Basically, it was just weeping.
Yeah, yeah. It comes up through the cement.
And then yeah, and generally speaking, they just kept stuff up off the ground. But
Yeah.
here, I wanted to kind of draw attention to this because the response here will inevitably be like, "Here's a bunch of money, replace it."
Hmm.
When like this is a perfect opportunity. This looks like a mobile home park, to be honest.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
I mean, yeah, because mobile homes and are constructed homes are typically just long rectangles. And so, yeah, if
Right,
I
and
had to
they're
say,
packed together like this.
yeah, if I had to say, yeah, that's a mobile home.
Okay, so and it looks like the water is up because a mobile home is going to sit up off the ground, right?
Typically, they're about a foot and a half to 2 feet. Yeah,
Yeah, but this looks like it's still got to the first floor.
yeah,
And so when you look at something in this in aggregate, like of course the response is like insurance, if they have it, is going to pay out and they're going to have
yeah.
contractors come and fix it or something. But massive amounts of money is going to flow into this, and
Hmm.
two things aren't going to change. One, they're going to stay there instead of like reclaiming this and being like, oh, okay, when it floods, the water likes to go here. Maybe we
Hmm.
should turn this into like a park that can
Yeah,
absorb water, and relocate these people to uh, maybe like denser apartment blocks in the core of the city, right? Where transportation and services are more easily accessible instead of this kind of suburban pattern you can kind of see painted across the entire
right.
picture.
You would want to make sure that you paid them fair value for the fact they're losing. I mean, it's a tiny plot of land, and honestly, most people who have mobile homes rent a space, but losing access to that is not nothing.
Right. And you brought up my second thing that's not going to change. One, they're not going to move this. And two, they're going to bail out the the lot owner
Right,
and
right.
with disaster funds, and potentially some people will get disaster money. The insurance money, the homeowners or the if they're even insured, right?
Right. I mean, once it's paid off, you're no longer required to maintain insurance on your home. And
Right.
flooding, my understanding is flooding insurance is completely separate from
It
regular
is.
insurance. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure on the positives, but there might be personal property insurance and stuff like that is what I mean.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
hmm.
Especially like auto policies, right? Like cars that
Right.
flood out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so insurance will maybe make some of these people partially fulfilled. Disaster relief would go to the lot owner, but they're not going to change the system of ownership.
No.
Is my point. Is if this is a mobile home park and people rent the space that they own the mobile home, but you don't really because you rent the land. Um,
Oh yeah, and if at any point, you don't pay it, you're evicted, and moving a mobile home is not as easy as you might think it is. It's not as mobile as the name would lead you to believe.
oh yeah, no, they're mobile because they can build them remotely and bring them in, but they're not
Yeah.
easy to move. Um, and so at any rate, like these people get hosed. These are poor people, generally elderly,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I knew a lot of like younger families that lived in mobile home parks and stuff, but I know in Chico, most of them are restricted for older folks. I don't
The only
know.
the only two people I know are my wife's mother and a woman I used to work with who was in her 60s.
Yeah, they're primarily for older people, and they're great if you built them around a community, right?
Yeah.
But they're not generally because the people who rent the lot space don't own the land.
Yeah.
When the way to do it would be okay, you kind of own your home, but the land is held in trust. Right? We're
Right.
talking about a fucking land trust. And then everybody that lives on this parcel of land in this mobile home park can make decisions
Right.
for what they set their rent to based on a democratic process and transparent operation that says this is our expenses for blowing the leaves, or this is our
Yeah.
expense for delivering water, or whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then it becomes more like an HOA that is democratically run rather than a dictatorial rental situation.
Right. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of lessons that aren't going to be learned through this flooding, despite it being so fucking common.
Yeah.
Because California's wealth didn't come from the Silicon Valley. It came from fucking agriculture.
Mhm.
And so communities like Merced, like Fresno, like Chico, they sat near streams where there was a fresh water supply,
Mhm.
right? Like that's just the pattern of development. Every major city. Actually, I think Atlanta was the first city to be built around railroads and not rivers. Don't quote me on that, but I recall hearing that somewhere and it made a lot of sense. I think James Howard Kunstler mentioned it in one of his books. Let's see. People cleaning up thick old mud. This is San Lorenzo River in Felton.
Never heard of Felton before.
Not familiar with that community.
No.
I did look up this community,
I like this one.
Chatsworth.
Yeah.
Chatsworth is a neighborhood in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So basically, erosion
Yeah. Yeah.
carved out the under of this, and it dropped, and people are just. I doubt
Right through.
that this collapsed underneath them based on the smashing of the hoods.
Right. Right.
Which means that people are fucking so oblivious during bad weather that they literally just drove off a cliff.
I believe it. I believe it.
And it looks like they put their fucking sunshade up when they left. Because you don't want the interior getting fucked up, right?
That is. Maybe they're
Am I wrong?
airbags. Maybe they're airbags. Let's just assume they're airbags.
Shit. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm such a prick.
Well, a lot of vehicles nowadays have the sheet airbags that go across the front, and the whole purpose is to stop the
You're
glass.
absolutely right, because there's no way they'd put a sunscreen up, but that's what it kind of looked like.
It does look like it a bit, yeah.
God, I'm a dick. Now I feel bad,
cynical.
poor motherfucker. Just probably got a fucking bad back or broken leg or some shit. Because I mean,
I don't hunt down this Steve.
I don't know how deep that
Steve
is.
Solo
But
motherfucker.
deeper than a car,
Yeah.
and it wasn't just one either. That's kind of the almost.
Yeah, is that a car or a motorcycle?
No, that's a car. See the front wheel, and this is
yeah. It's upside down. It's like coming the other direction.
Smashed and then flipped over. It's actually, you can't see under this section of road. It looks like it's worn out underneath, but the piece of road's still there.
Yeah. You can drive over that.
That was in Chatsworth, which is in LA. Here's also in LA a flooded section in the
Union
underground
Station.
there, the subway system. Which the train system in LA is a fucking trip, bro. Because LA is so spread out, right?
Yeah.
But it's fairly effective. I've used it when I'm like, hey, I want to go here, and I'm hanging out with my cousin, like somewhere in the south part of the county, or my grandpa or whatever. I'm always just like, you can just take me to the fucking train station. I'll ride in. Like, you don't need to sit in traffic for an hour, hour and a half to take me somewhere. I'll literally just take the train. It's an interesting experience.
Get me to a
in LA.
station. I'll make it. Yeah.
Compared to like other places with metros like Philly or Boston or DC or New York
NYC,
or whatever.
yeah.
I've never been to Chicago, so I don't know what their elevated trains are like, but let's see here. Aptos again. Waterfront. Looks like a rock slide. Maybe
That's
not.
been happening around here, but mostly along the 168. Had a few landslides, rock slides, and had to shut down the roads. It basically isolated some of the mountain towns, and they're just like, if you can get out, please get out.
Yeah.
We can't tell you when we're going to be able to get the roads open again.
I
Oh,
saw
that?
a few more pictures of here in the North State with rock slides that kind of like basically kind of made a highway one lane, which is like,
Gilroy.
yeah, this is in Gilroy, which is also South Bay, but not that far south.
But it still smells like garlic.
It's in the valley south of San Jose.
Yeah.
It's the home of garlic.
Yeah.
In Aptos, I think, or maybe it's another community nearby in Santa Cruz County, is the world home of the artichoke. Watsonville.
I like that picture. She just.
This is also South Bay. I like the fucking serious, man. They were serious about the fucking sandbags, bro.
They made a fucking effort. Yeah.
They did what they could, right? Here, this is
effort
all
was made.
The venting underneath.
Right. Yeah.
I like that she comes equipped with fucking waiters, dude.
Yeah.
She knows what's up.
She's just like, yeah, I know this shit happens. Come on.
Yeah, here's a picture of a landslide. This is what I was talking about in Scotts Valley.
Oh, okay. When you highlight, it's hard to see.
Sorry. I know.
That's okay. Just let you know.
Yeah, so it's basically closed a lane of traffic.
Yeah. Well,
you're like,
it's 2 lanes. That's one whole direction.
Right. And so I know we're almost out of time on this, and we don't need to really talk about it.
Yeah.
People know what this shit looks like, but like, I always like to ground myself, pun intended, I suppose, in this case, with the fact that like this is how fucking landforms change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a reason that like the Sierra Nevada is this mighty mountain range, and Appalachia is like rolling hills, basically.
Yeah.
And that's because this shit happens over not every year, not even every decade, but like these kind of localized cataclysms happen all over the place. And over time, in aggregate, it grinds the mountains down. And California is geologically very, very young. I actually looked up the age of Appalachia so I could compare it. And Appalachia is 12 times older, about 400
million years old. Yeah.
80 million for Appalachia and about 40 to 80 maybe million for California.
Yeah. All the Sierra Nevadas are post-dinosaur.
And realistically, the Sierra Nevada are older than the Coast Range, which is where this happened.
Right.
Yeah.
We still have a lot of grinding down to do before we.
That's why California is prone to earthquakes. We're still being built.
Oh yeah.
Well,
and the thing is, on the East Coast, everything is just pulling apart and getting thinner and less mountainous. On our end, we're building mountains still due to the fact that you have the Pacific plate plunging underneath the continental plate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not stopping anytime soon. So we're just going to have more and more mountain building events, more and more volcanoes, earthquakes, etc.
Yep. And most of that's on time scales irrelevant to
removed from us. Yeah. Our great. Yeah.
This is in Aptos, which this is a fitting picture for that community because everything, like I said, I did ayahuasca there. Everything I know is kind of bohemian. So
yeah,
Santa Cruz too. So this is a perfect fucking
she
picture.
Got her guitar and her long hair.
Yeah, a little bohemian looking chick with a fucking hauling the most important thing to her. A day bag in her guitar. Look at this fucking road.
Oh,
bro.
what the fuck?
Yeah. So I think what happened is it washed out the retaining wall. And see, this fell back against the tree, and then the road just sunk.
Yeah. Wow. Nobody's getting through there.
And this is also obviously in the Pacific Northwest part of California, it looks like. I'm not really quite sure where Scotts Valley is. I thought Scotts Valley was off of Highway 3, but I think up here it said Highway 17 or something. So I must be thinking of a different community.
Scotts Valley is southwest of San Jose.
Okay, there you go. Same location as Aptos and
Yeah,
Santa
Santa
Cruz.
Cruz. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a tree that fell over in Sacramento. This is a great picture. I didn't see this one earlier, but I had, it's Thursday, so I talked to my therapist and I was telling him how, like, or maybe it was somebody else I was telling. I don't remember. Either way, I was saying how when we went to go to my grandma's, my grandma died a few months ago, and then this last Sunday we went to her kind of celebration of life party or whatever with my family,
Yeah.
and it was in Fair Oaks, which is kind of like suburban Sacramento. And we were driving through Citrus Heights in Roseville and saw a bunch of trees like this. And you look at their root masses, and even my 9-year-old daughter, I was like, "Hey, why do you think the roots look like that? And why do you think that tree fell over?" And she's like, "Probably because they water the grass." And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Shallow root systems.
Yeah, look at how shallow this fucking root system is. The whole
Yeah.
thing ripped up.
Yeah. It has no need to go any deeper. Why would it?
Yeah.
Life is lazy. It's not just us humans that are lazy. All of life is lazy. If they can get what they need in the first few inches of soil, they will.
That's right.
Like, the only reason to go any deeper would be a tap root for support.
Right. And generally, many will, but that's not strong enough to
No,
anchor a big
no.
tree, especially when the ground is so goddamn saturated. I don't
Yeah.
want to just say, and it's also incredibly windy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
It's been crazy windy around here. That is definitely one thing we have not been spared.
mhm. So and that's obviously when you show the beach boardwalk and those coastal communities, like that's what's happening. It's storm surge just from the wind.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's not coming. I mean, there are rivers that meet estuaries there along that part of the coast, but those particular pictures above were storm surge, I'm pretty sure.
Well,
But anyway,
we've been going for about 30 minutes on this one.
on this picture,
No, on this topic.
I know, I'm aware.
Okay.
Actually,
Okay.
I mentioned that we
Oh.
were almost done,
Yeah.
but I did want to mention that kind of I see in this image like what we see with just about everything, which is a combination of factors.
Right.
We had a lot of rain, so and a lot of wind, so there were some natural disasters there, but there's also like a management issue, just like in the picture above with the mobile home park that's all flooded out.
Mhm.
Like most of these things happen, right? The discussion of the landslides and how geographies change, how landforms change over time. And instead, we're just kind of like, oh, I don't know what happened. Even though you made, like, not you in particular, we didn't make these decisions. These systems have been in place for decades. But they're all built in an ideology or rooted in an ideology of control over nature rather than working with nature.
Right. And that might not even be a good tree for that region. It might have just been something somebody thought was pretty.
Yeah, that looks like a scale leaf tree, like a cedar or
Yeah.
something, possibly in the valley, and they're primarily like conifers are generally found in higher elevations.
Yeah,
Here.
mountainous areas. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep, broadleafs in the valley, so they can shed their leaves.
Yep.
At any rate, you can
Yeah.
close that window and shift to something else. I feel like
we're back at Docking Bay 94. Just the two
yes.
of us. Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I wanted to talk about that and have a brief discussion on
Gotcha.
how fucking insane it is that all of this happens and we know it's going to happen, but we build it incorrectly on purpose because it's profitable to someone or it's based in an ideology that, like,
I mean, I wonder if
incompatible.
everyone's just been, hit with the drought messaging for so long that, that you've begun to believe that it's never going to go back to a state where we might receive some rain, or maybe people don't realize that when you're in California, it's a Mediterranean environment, so it's basically long periods of dry followed by intense wet. And I mean, I could understand that, like I moved to Fresno and it hadn't rained seriously since I moved here, since before I moved here, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
and we get tiny amounts, and then all of a sudden, we're getting 2-3 inches all at once, and
Yeah.
people aren't ready for that. Even though we know what happens, we know that flooding's a thing. We know that we're going to get some precipitation above average. I don't know. I think maybe the messaging just isn't there, and people get complacent, more or less.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
People just don't even care to learn. They might be like, "Oh, it could flood here," but
I mean, who's got time? Who's got time to learn all this stuff?
you saw the workers had to get cleaned up before the Golden Globes. That was
What?
one of the pictures above that I scrolled over
Oh no, I didn't.
because I don't give a shit. And
I
it's
must have
like,
missed it. Oh, was it one of the advertisements or something, or like?
no. It was one of the photos in the essay.
Oh, okay.
I just scrolled past it because I didn't think it was important because it doesn't matter to me. But I'm bringing it up now as satire.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
All right,
Priorities are kind of all
moving
wrong.
on.
Yeah. So
Do you
recently,
want to play a tabletop role-playing game in a setting where people have to respond to disasters? Standard D&D doesn't work. What rule system do you use? GURPS? I don't know. Maybe try Genesys. Go ahead.
Genesys is fantastic, and given the problems with the open gaming license that has been called into question, if you are unfamiliar with the open gaming license that Wizards of the Coast established with D&D 3rd edition, it basically read that people can make derivative products from the rule systems that Wizards of the Coast owns, and thus you have games like Pathfinder, companies like Kobold Press, where they're based upon earlier editions of D&D or their current editions of D&D, but it is like a supplement to it. And for decades now, like 3rd edition was early 2000s. Over decades now, this has just been an unquestioned thing. And in fact, Monty Cook, the creator of that edition, tried to make the open gaming license solid so that it would be forever in perpetuity, unchangeable. And if you didn't like it, and if they did change it, you could fall back on the old license, etc., etc. Well, Hasbro, which owns Wizards of the Coast, which owns D&D, has decided that they want money, and so they're altering the license and saying that anyone who uses their product to make money over certain amounts, it's a pretty high amount, admittedly, like $750,000 a year, has to pay them a 20% fee of the money they make above that amount. So it is like a marginal tax rate, but it's pretty severe. They basically get it for doing nothing, like they're already selling you the product. And so a lot of people are pissed off and looking for alternatives. And as you said, enter Genesys. Genesys is based off of Fantasy Flight's Star Wars RPG. It uses a narrative dice system.
Say that again. Narrative dice
system. Yes, I will explain that shortly after I go over the history. What happened with Fantasy Flight Games is they decided to spin off their RPG section into its own company called Edge Studios, linked in the show notes, due to basically trying to distance themselves from a product that wasn't doing great. They rely more on miniatures now. Well, anyway, so Edge Studios now is making the Star Wars RPG, the Genesys RPG, both based off of the same narrative dice system. And the concept behind the narrative dice system is that you make a roll. A difficulty is determined, you roll the dice, and the dice help you to tell the story. Normally, D20 systems, you succeed, you fail, that's it. It's up to the DM alone to determine what that success or failure looks like. Normally, it's pretty cut and dry. You attack the kobold, you hit the kobold, you roll some dice, you do some damage. Maybe you crit, maybe you get a critical failure. But there's not much to do. You either double some dice.
And it's up to the game master, dungeon master to
almost entirely
be like, oh, you barely grazed his shoulder.
Yeah. And it is almost entirely put on the dungeon master's shoulders to determine what happens. This system kind of turns that on its head and says that you make an attack, maybe you fail entirely, but you have some what is called advantage or triumph. I believe they rename them in Genesys. I didn't get a ton of time to look at it, but the idea would be even a failure can have some aspect of success to it, and even a success can have some aspect of failure to it. You can have a ringing success, where not only do you hit them, but you also nick a wire that is holding a bag of sand up above a stage. The bag of sand falls down and hits someone adjacent to them, maybe knocks them off their, knocks them off balance, so they're easier to hit the next round. Things of that nature. Stuff that is on its face cartoonish, but kind of in keeping with Star Wars as well. If you think about Han Solo sneaking through the forests of Endor, he's doing well. He's doing well. Snap, boom, he hits a twig. Uh, it alerts a stormtrooper, but then he reacts quickly enough. That might be a failure on a stealth check, but he has the advantage of being a first to act, and he's able to take an attack. Things like that, or Luke Skywalker swinging across the chasm on the Death Star. He shoots out the controls, so he succeeds at shutting the door to keep the stormtroopers on the other side. But Leia points out, "Oh my gosh, you actually shot out the controls for the bridge. What are we going to do?" So he succeeded with a failure, but then you quickly react and throw across your grappling hook because you're a farm boy on a desert planet with very few mountains. You have a grappling hook for some reason.
It doesn't need to make sense, bro.
It doesn't need to make. He rolled a vigilance check. It allowed him to have the thing he needed, or he spent a destiny point.
That's right.
And so the system is based off of the Star Wars. So we mostly know the Star Wars, but the system is very similar. What they've done is, in typical Star Wars RPG fashion, the company that is in control of the content makes a Star Wars game for a while, but they're more or less utilizing that as a research bed for a different game. It happened previously in the era of Wizards of the Coast controlling Star Wars IP, where they made an edition that was very similar to D&D 4th edition. So they basically utilized this game that Star Wars people loved to playtest D&D 4th edition, which was a horrible failure. So apparently they didn't test it well enough. A lot of people like to forget that 4th edition existed, but it seems like this is another instance where this company has utilized Star Wars to test their current product, which is Genesys. Genesys, the core rulebook, which you can see is right here. Where did I put it? There you are. The core rulebook has a lot of different ideas for different settings. The rules in general are very basic. There's the special dice right there, the narrative dice. The rules are very general. There are different ideas for very basic settings, like they have cyberpunk, Weird West rules. They have space opera rules, and they have fantasy rules and more. But it's basically, it allows you to use one system to cover a whole lot of different ideas, and it works really well due to the fact that it is that narrative dice system. You can cover from D&D fantasy to freaking eldritch horror of Cthulhu ideas, all with the same dice system, and do it well.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at it, but I was super interested in talking to a few folks about a good system for doing like a zombie apocalypse survival kind of game. Mostly because I think that you could structure it in such a way that like you can utilize it to like gain insights about, like, we were talking about flooding, right, and cataclysms or whatever, like being
Right.
able to adapt and react in an environment that's radically different than the one we're accustomed to. I mean, I thought it'd be a fun exercise, even if you're doing it like modern day everything, and it's like a civil unrest scenario, right? Like, and you're just telling like a 1 or 2 shot, and you're like, oh, you're down at the protest with your son and your group and everything, and all this sort of sudden cops start shooting fucking tear gas or whatever, or this like fucking neo-Nazi group shows up and they have armor and weapons,
Right.
like how do you interact? How do you run away? Okay, they're working with the neo-Nazis and the cops are working together because they're more or less the same thing. What do you do? How do you get out? All right, every time you turn a corner, like, you can react to your environment in a real way. And I thought it might be interesting in that respect. Of course, all the other kind of fantasy and fantastic settings, right, like sci-fi and all that other shit. But the narrative dice system seems to like lend itself to any kind of storytelling.
Oh yeah. And it's kind of like the polar opposite of Paizo's Pathfinder series, because
Mhm.
um, they stuck with the D&D third and 3.5 edition, which was very number heavy, very crunchy. Um, it lends itself well to using miniatures on a map rather than theater of the mind, where everything's in your mind unless it gets like too intense and there's too many actors involved. Um, and it kind of goes in the opposite direction, where things can be kept small. You know, we've played Star Wars, and very rarely do we need to pull out a map unless my ability to describe a scene fails me, and I have
Or if
to.
it's specifically like set up as like a dungeon crawl type encounter.
Yeah, yeah,
You open the
and
room and there's a fucking cannibalistic Ronald McDonald.
right, right. That was actually an older edition of Star Wars. I believe that was the Weston Games D6 system.
It was,
Uh,
yeah, it happened. It was fucking crazy.
yeah,
But it was set up as a dungeon crawl, so like a map makes
right,
sense, is what I was saying.
right, right. Oh yeah, yeah. I
Mhm.
got you. Yeah, so it's basically the polar opposite of the number crunch. And D&D Fifth Edition kind of got away from the number crunch because they realized that they were targeting a very slim audience that was like into that. Like I want to maximize my bonuses and make sure I get the bonus from flanking along with the bonus from my magic weapon and from this feat that I have and blah 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 blah. And they kind of like shoved it off to the side, and they're like, that crunchiness is going to get some people, but like we want to attract your average person who just wants to come in, tell a collaborative story, and like swing their sword a few times. You know.
Yeah. I think one of the words the book uses, it
Mhm.
might be one of the Fantasy Flight games, or it might be the Genesis core rule book, but it describes its system as quote cinematic. I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure it uses
yeah,
that word. And the idea is to use a narrative dice system to cooperatively tell a story. So instead of being I mean, role playing games are always kind of cooperative storytelling, but like instead of like you said earlier, all of um, the 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 details, the sensory details of an encounter or a dice roll is dependent upon the one running the game to tell that.
yeah,
Whereas with the narrative dice system and our experience with it, something happens and the game master, the person in charge of kind of overseeing the story and adjudicating the rules, they are able to ask the players, you know, do you have something interesting that you like, a visual element that you want to add into the story at this time to um, give life, I guess, to
you're
your
absolutely
dice
right.
roll.
Yeah, yeah, and that is a very good way of putting it. It kind of puts the onus on the player to be creative and not just think of it in terms of I attempt something and I either succeed or I fail. Because rarely is life like that. Like you might go off and take a class, like, for example, and not do well, but then realize in the middle of the class that you really like something about the class that you're not quite getting from that. And so you branch off and find something else. You're like, oh, I'm in an ecology class. And maybe I don't like that, but I like the interesting, fact that like geology affects ecology. And so I want to go study geology now or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Not a personal story at all.
I mean,
But
everything's connected, right? And like
yeah, yeah,
that's kind of what a graduate program is, right? It's like, okay, you study ecology, but like, where does it fit in? What is your niche?
yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we've had a ton of fun, operating within the Star Wars narrative dice system. And thankfully, the dice are compatible. So if you're heavily invested in Star Wars dice like I am, I've got a big bucket of them. It all carries
Yeah,
over.
you can use those and just interpret the symbols the same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
And
kind of
go ahead.
just an abstraction, like you said. There's a rarer symbol that represents something really cool.
Right. Or really
And you can
bad.
have that really cool thing even when you fail, right?
Yeah. And one of the more
Like,
interesting points is you can have that really, sorry, go ahead.
no, I
You're,
was gonna
you're
say,
getting to, you're getting
uh,
to it.
for example, um, the Weequay or whatever it was on the sail barge, right? When they're gonna fucking march them off the plank into the Sarlacc pit.
Yeah.
in Return of the Jedi.
Hmm.
Like that would be like the soldier that turned around and accidentally hit Boba Fett. And wait, well, that was Han that did that, huh?
Han Solo,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Han failed an attack check, but got like a triumph.
Yeah.
And the triumph is you just eliminated like one of your toughest enemies on
Right.
accident.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
another interesting fact is failures cancel successes, threats cancel advantages, but despairs and triumphs must coincide and exist
Right.
together. And so you can have
Something
something
really bad
incredibly,
could happen and something
yeah,
really good could happen.
yeah, all in the same role, not even in the same turn, just in the same role. And that happens, and like it really stretches your creative skills to determine what that is. It's not written in the rules, but in a lot of the live play sessions I've seen, and even in our own, we say that the positive dice are determined by the players, and the negative dice are determined by the DM. And on occasion, someone will just kind of offhandedly like make a joke about something, that might happen, and it's like, no, that's it right there. That is the thing that happens because I love it. It's too creative. It's too funny.
Yeah, I've played a lot of D20. And I mean, not a lot. I am not a fucking. There are people who are gamers. I'm a gamer, but I'm not like,
Yeah.
you know, I have some experience now playing a variety of different rule systems, a variety of different settings, um, you know, but I have played a significant amount of D20 across many campaigns and settings. And it does kind of just trap you into maximizing your buffs or whatever
Right.
to
Right.
succeed, and there's not really a lot to it, and there's not a lot of risk involved once you get your stats up and you're like, okay, it doesn't matter how many fucking goblin minions you throw at me, like they can't deal enough damage to get
Right.
through my you know armor or whatever.
Yeah, and they're relying on a 5% chance of getting a 20 to hit you.
Right, precisely.
Right.
And so then it just becomes
Oh,
kind of broken in a way that the narrative dice doesn't, because
yes. Minions. That's you bring an interesting point. I don't even know if you intended to, but minion groups exist. And the
yeah.
idea is that a bunch of small creatures can gather together and improve their skill. In D&D, they would grant each other advantage. That only allows you to roll the die twice, effectively bringing it up to a 10%. I'm sure there's someone who's much better at math. It's like, actually, it's 8.725 due to this. But it's around a 10% chance, two instances of 5%. Um, in the narrative dice system, minions can get together, and basically, for everyone above the first, they start to merge their dice together. And so, like, you fight a single stormtrooper, no problem. Yeah, you fight two, it's getting more dangerous. Three, four, a squad, suddenly you're really threatened. This game does not follow the inverse ninja rule, which is, of course, the rule that states that for every ninja that is on screen, or sorry, every additional ninja on screen, the individual ninja is substantially worse. Because, of course, well, if there's 100 ninjas, how well could they all be trained? Not very well. But this game is like, no, no, no. Stormtroopers are fucking scary, and when you got six of them together, like they're gonna hit you, they're gonna pin you down. And so it does a really good job of like keeping that realism of like, no, man, like 10 different people firing at you is scary. Like,
So we probably should have led this half of the show with like, if you're not into gaming or you're not familiar with
oh yeah,
it,
run away.
some of this is not going to make any sense.
Yeah, run away, run away. But no, I'm sure they've left by now.
If they came in the first place, but it's
Right.
okay. We keep doing what we do.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, minions is a really useful thing too, because it makes speed of fucking dice rolls. Because if you want it to be more
That's
difficult
true. Yeah.
but not have to make more dice rolls, you can just add in one more minion.
That's
Or
another
and you can
thing.
do it on the fucking fly too.
Yeah.
You'll be like, oh shit, they fucking took out 3 of the 4 minions in one attack because they had the extra damage that rolls, right? Like, because
Right.
they're
Right.
treated, they're even their hit point pool is treated together.
That's one. Yeah.
And then once it's resolved, you eliminate units and it affects their skill die. But you might be like, oh shit. Oh, guess what? There were, others in reserve that are able to enter,
But
and
for this
add
one
that
turn,
to
they
the minion
suck.
group. Yeah, you can play it however you want. I mean, if that was your story, right? You don't want to make it
Right.
impossible. We're not trying to kill them.
Right.
But
Right.
speaking of death, it's also
Mm,
very serious. Like, I don't know, some of the other campaigns I played, like, you can get a really good armor rating and, really high hit points or whatever through feats and shit. And
hmm
you kind of just became almost invulnerable.
Right.
And in this
Especially at
game,
low levels.
yeah. And in this game, the way that it works out, like, you would have to be playing a campaign that, like, or just be doling out experience points to develop your character, like, a ridiculous way to
Right.
get those feats. And even then, the way that the career and class structure works, like, you don't really have access to those. Like, so there's only so many toughens you can take to increase your wound threshold, right? Like,
Right.
your hit
Right.
points. And so you're really limited. And, like, the weapons are fair, and it could be a single shot or two because your damage is not exclusively determined by the weapon, but also by, like, your number of successes.
Right. And that was something I was going to bring up. You mentioned fewer dice. You make a single roll for an attack, the number of successes you have is added to your weapon base damage roll. So you don't even need to make a second roll.
Mm-mm.
And so it's about expediency. Um,
It's more about the story than
yeah.
crunching numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. We want to get those dice out of the way.
Yeah, and so far so good. I mean, we've played a number of campaigns with it. I
Yeah.
honestly, like, I could tell right away, but even more so now that I've played it a while with a couple different groups of people and stuff. Like, it is by far my favorite rule system I've ever played.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, followed shortly by West End Games, D6 system.
Yeah, and that was cool too.
Yeah.
I liked it because the modifiers were simple.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
1, 2, roll a second die, roll another dice, 1, 2.
Another nice aspect of this system is that when it comes to the big bad evil guy, um, in D&D, basically action economy rules. If you have more actions, you're probably going to win. And so, like, you'll reserve a heal, most likely a word of healing, for someone who's dropping. And so you don't even need to, like, keep people at high health. You're just like, oh, they went down. I heal them, they pop back up. They spend half a movement to stand, they can still take an attack. Um, in this system, the bad guys get a rating called adversary that makes them much harder to hit. And then on top of that, if you really want it to be a fight where it's just the one bad guy, think Dooku or Palpatine or
Grievous.
yeah, or Kylo Ren or anybody like that. You can say, in addition to that adversary rating that makes them harder to hit, they also act at whatever their initiative roll is, and then after all the other people have acted. So, they go wherever they rolled in the initiative order, all the PCs take their turn, and then they go again right at the end. And that's just because you get swamped as a villain in D&D, and they had to add in the, like, legendary resistances and lair actions and all that crap. Just to kind of, like, make it a bit more even. But here it's just like, no, you just give them an extra action at the end of every round. They're outnumbered anyway. It kind of makes sense, and so you can have someone who makes a lightsaber attack and then also shoves someone off a cliff at the end of the turn. Making it so that they have to, like, grab on and pull themselves up, and they don't get to act on that next turn. So it's a temporary lowering of the action economy rather than just like, oh yeah, I killed them. And you're like, no, I removed them from combat for one round.
Right. Yeah. And another cool thing about combat is that, like I mentioned, that you don't really have a lot of opportunities to beef up your hit points unless you do it from your
Right.
build, right? Like,
Right.
some species are just fucking tougher, right?
Yeah. Barabels.
And but outside of that, it is fairly difficult to increase those, and the weapons can be pretty damaging. Uh And oh man, I lost where I was going. Sorry, late night streams. I'm kind of fucking tired and high. But healing. Like critical wounds. You mentioned wards. I haven't played a lot of D&D, mostly like Pathfinder and like some other GURPS and some other things like that.
Just doubles damage typically.
Yeah, exactly. But like in healing, like if you get hit with a critical hit or 2 critical hits, there's lasting effects, and like you cannot heal. You can't just be like, okay, I roll high enough, now you're healed. No, it's
right.
like, no, if you are wounded, like we cannot pretend that you can just be like, boom, I'm back. Right.
Yeah.
Like it's like really like being severely wounded, like you can make 1 healing check a day, or
Well, and
a
it's measured.
medic can make 1 healing check.
That is measured in 2 different ways as well, because you have, of course, the stim packs that we all know from the Knights of the Old Republic that pretty much didn't exist before that, I think. But their
And they
diminishing
used one
returns.
in Andor when they had to get Nemec up to use the Pathfinder.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, remember after he got crushed by the credits on the ship when they were
Oh,
saving,
yeah.
when
They're
he
like, fuck
fucking
this guy.
stimmed in, and he
Yeah,
like kind of brought him to
yeah.
enough to fucking do something.
Yeah. But every time you use a stim pack on someone, the effectiveness is reduced by 1, and the standard is 5. So you get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, done.
Yeah.
And the criticals are the opposite way, where every time you roll a critical, you add 10 for each prior critical. And so, like, you might get some minor criticals, like, oh, you're stunned till the end of the round. Oh, you lose your action this round too. You can't move unless you spend strain, or unless you take your action
Right.
to move, or take a penalty on all of your rolls using this ability, all the way up to you lose a limb, you lose your life, obviously, one of the worst ones. But yeah, it's incredibly fun. They ported over to starships as well, and so it lends itself to being exceptionally dangerous to the PCs, especially because they have to deal with it for a much longer time than the NPCs do. Typically, an NPC gets hit with a critical, he's dead, unless he is,
or as we play it, incapacitated.
yeah, unless it is the big bad evil guy, in which case, then you can start to make them add up. And if they get away, like every big bad evil guy should, hopefully they'll still have that critical on them. By the time you get to them again, not always, but hopefully.
What else did you want to talk about with Genesys?
I just really like how versatile they decided to make it, and the fact that you can built in. They're like, here's a few rules for, dragony fantasy. Here's some for like Weird West. I don't know if you're familiar with Weird West. Okay, yeah,
A little bit.
it's
kind
just basically
of has kind of supernatural.
Yeah, think of it as like a multiverse where America made it to the Wild West, and suddenly there was zombies, magic, shit like that. Like
It's kind of like steampunk, but more fantasy than sci-fi.
Yeah, it kind of like splits off at that point. Where steampunk tends to be kind of like Victorian era steam stuff like that, and so instead it's like, oh, the American West, you have guns, zombies, dynamite, fireballs. Everything kind of diverges, and you get to have fun with that. They also cover cyberpunk. There's a whole settings called androids. So if you want to play in the future, you can play in the future. It's a much more that one is a much more near future as compared to their space opera rules. I don't know if anyone's played like cyberpunk or anything like that, but it can be incredibly fun. It helps you to jump off of where we are in as humans, and like kind of play around with the idea that corporations are destroying us slowly.
Yeah, cyberpunk is kind of like dystopian high tech instead of just like a zombie or whatever would be like a dystopian horror, right? Like Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Potentially dystopian horror, right?
Yeah.
Versus yeah, there you go. Versus dystopian, like, yeah, but really kind of the logical conclusion if we didn't have energy constraints and if there weren't like
Right,
other
right,
resource constraints on the planet, it would be where we're going.
right.
Fortunately for some, unfortunately for others, depending on your perspective, like those systems are collapsing now. And even though we do have fantastic surveillance apparatus and we do have a corporate control of everything,
Mhm.
it's not quite going to develop into like a mature culture,
Right,
so to
right.
speak. And
Yeah.
cyberpunk is kind of like Blade Runner or Johnny
Cyberpunk
Mnemonic.
2077. I think video games, I haven't been exposed to it much. I saw Blade Runner while doing something else once, but Cyberpunk 2077 comes to mind. If you've ever played the Deus Ex games,
Did
that
you
is a
ever
great
see
example of cyberpunk.
Artor did Artorr? He does like mini docs on like pop
Okay.
culture, like gaming and other things. And his mini docs are fucking phenomenal. I think I brought him up one time to you about he did one on the politics of Star Wars.
How does
And he
how does one spell this?
Artorr, I want to see. He also had one on uh um kind of on the Bad Batch, kind of, which season 2 just started. I don't really have anything to say about it yet. Um, but about just kind of like that question about like what do you do with soldiers after the war is over, and it was really kind of fucking deep. And at the end of it, he did this
Mm,
whole thing talking about like veteran suicide and like and provided like help resources and really kind of like using pop culture, in this case a Star Wars cartoon, as a launch point for like a really serious issue for an empire. Like,
right,
what do
right.
we do when you've sent all these young men to experience these not just experience, and in many ways more important that they commit terror and trauma,
Hmm.
um, and then what happens when you don't need them anymore,
Right,
right?
right.
Like, how do you reintegrate a broken person like that into society?
And
It's
I
an
mean,
interesting question.
that's a question America needs to ask itself right fucking now.
For sure. We didn't even touch on one of the most important things ever. Maybe we can cover that on Monday.
What's
But
that?
these concessions in
Mm,
Congress, bro, dude, in everything that I was part of that. I mean, I'm not influential, but I was one of the many people that agreed with the tactic to force the vote that the young new electeds that kind of came after on the tidal wave of Bernie energy, right?
mhm,
Bernie Sanders energy, that those people would fight and create visibility for these really fucking important issues like
mm,
Medicare for all, among others,
right.
student debt relief, and other programs, housing, affordable housing, things like that. And they wouldn't fucking fight for it. And then now that Republicans took Congress and they have kind of their own faction of, I mean, the funny thing is that we were expecting that of people who aren't actually radicals. Now you have a radical faction of fairly young in terms of like not spent a lot of time in Washington. Um, Fairly new
Green.
arrivals to Washington, basically getting a ton of concessions, including Church Committee 2.0, which Church Committee was back in the day and investigated how the FBI and CIA were running like domestic intelligence gathering.
Oh, okay.
All the shit that we know about how they like infiltrated groups and like
Yeah.
sowed discord or all these other things, and that came out of a congressional or investigation back then, and they're redoing it now. I think the committee they stood up, I heard it's a subcommittee under the Judiciary Oversight Committee or something. I forget which one it falls under, but they made a subcommittee called something to the effect of investigating um, the weaponization of the intelligence community or something like that. And they're going
Yeah.
to look at the fact that high level government officials and intelligence officials were complicit in suppressing certain information, like, you know, corruption of presidential candidates, etc., and how it was weaponized by in favor of kind of establishment politics and away from kind of more populist type politics.
Hmm.
So it'll be fucking interesting. Unfortunately, they're probably not going to really. I hope they genuinely approach it in a way that's like, let's find out everything. I want to find out how many fucking FBI agents were in fucking at the camps in Standing Rock.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know where, we don't need to know their names. Like, I don't want to, if they were breaking the law, then by all means, like, especially the higher ups that were doing things that were pretty transparently illegal or at
Mhm.
least against constitutional norms. They should be held accountable. But they're field agents and shit. You don't want to out them and get them and their families killed or whatever. They were just kind of doing their jobs.
Yeah.
But uncovering the corruption of that system and tearing it down from the top down is how you stop that from happening in the future. And not really. Our government's always going to fucking surveil us, but at any rate, I digress.
Mm-hmm. We're not talking about RPGs anymore.
No, but we are, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and it's like we talked about in the episode where we talked about science fiction and its role in society. Science fiction, fantasy, anything where you coat reality in a nice layer of abstraction so that you can talk about current issues without triggering too many people. It's a good thing. It gives you an opportunity to talk about real shit, and bypass a lot of the guards that people have. Like, you can try to talk straight to someone about something they care about, and they're prepared for that. They've got it on their mind. They know your talking points, et cetera, et cetera. You start talking about Klingons or fucking, Jar Jar Binks or whatever, immediately, like, drops their guard. They're just like, what is this guy talking about? Fantasy? Fucking Star Wars? What the hell? And they don't even know that you're actually talking about real shit, and they're like, yeah, it is kind of wrong, that the Bajorans had to, go through a genocide, and now they're expected to be thankful to, or to the Cardassians. Like, that is kind of messed up.
I did want to just add in, I found out today, again, talking to my therapist, he was talking about a psychologist or whatever, that child development expert doctor that wrote a book on child rearing back in the 50s or something, and his name was Benjamin Spock.
Yeah.
And then after our conversation, he texted me and was like, oh, I forgot to mention that Benjamin Spock was the inspiration for the name of Spock in the TV show, because he kind of represented this like cool rationality.
Yeah, I remember,
and I was like, that's fucking. I wrote him back, obviously have a nice weekend or whatever.
Yeah.
But I was like, I actually kind of was wondering if there was any relation, and so I'm glad you followed up with me.
Therapy Thursdays, good to go.
Yeah, but they're just like, oh, dude, check this out.
I remember like hearing about, like, I knew about Star Trek first, and then I heard about the Spock method of like raising children, and I was like, do you just, anytime they annoy you, you Vulcan nerve pinch them? Is that what we're talking about? Like, go to sleep, you little fuck. But no, apparently he's a guy.
Apparently he's a guy.
Yeah,
it came out of a conversation about in normalizing, the kind of transition from like your family beating the shit out of you and treating like and you being proper, like children being property of their parents, into this kind of thing where like, because there was a fundamental shift just in across living generations. Like my grandfathers and grandmother, the way they grew up is fundamentally different than how we raise our children.
Yeah.
But
just my dad being raised very different. Mom, not so much.
Yeah, and that's kind of why he brought it up. He's like, yeah, it's just a few generations of these ideas entering for them to be kind of implemented more and more each successive generation.
Yeah, maybe beating your children, not the best way to get them to do the right thing.
Right.
Maybe teach them what the right thing is and why it's the right thing.
Right.
Who would have thought?
Well, this was fun. I have to urinate and make another cocktail.
Me too.
And
hold as long as I could.
We discussed role-playing games and systems and a rule system that you can use if you want to explore themes like disasters, or whether they're fantastic like alien invasion or zombies, or real world like There's a
flooding,
big flash of
earthquakes.
light. You have no idea. This is what you experience. Okay, what do you do? Right.
Big flashes of light often precede darkness.
Right. And so you can basically, and maybe that would be a fun short campaign to play using Genesis as like a nuclear, nuclear attack kind of survival thing. And force a conversation about things and how to adapt, or wildfire, right? You fucking you're starting, you wake up, you hear pounding on the door, what do? Do you have your stuff ready to go?
Right.
And using that as like a mental exercise for preparing yourself for dealing with disasters like floods. At any rate, we need these exercises and we need to do these thought experiments because shit is getting real economically. We're on the precipice of absolute catastrophe, mirroring that of the Great Depression.
Everyone's predicting at a minimum a recession. So
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit more severe than what we experienced, because we're not going to be able to fucking print our way out of it, because the economic fundamentals are not similar to the way that previous recessions have been.
yeah.
But we'll see, right? We don't really
Yeah.
have control over that because we're not fucking bankers.
We're not
We're
the
not
Fed.
central bankers, right?
Yeah.
And other climate disasters, or escalation of the Ukraine conflict into a full-blown world war and or nuclear conflict. Those earthquakes that we're overdue for, like anything that you can imagine, like it would be good to do those exercises because those things will happen. And we're here to talk about the end of the American empire and all the cascading crises that help that happen. Because when liberty dies, it dies with thunderous applause. I
And
was
remember,
waiting for you to
everyone.
jump in with me on the second
Yeah,
half.
you didn't. But
We'll have to figure that out.
But remember, everyone, with all these impending disasters, don't raise children, raise adults.
Raise adults.
So
All right.
we're going to have subscribe over here. We're going to have a video over there, a video over there. Join us, like, subscribe, the bell, etc. All that good shit.
etc. We still don't have a way.
They add more steps every goddamn year. It seems like used to be just like, then it was subscribe. Now it's the fucking bell. There's people who are experts on this shit that are like, subscribe doesn't matter. Just like it, just watch it. I don't know what to do.
Subscriptions help people see it, right?
They do. It makes us feel better. We've got 7 subscribers last time I checked. Let's get it up to 10. I'd feel good. That's a double-digit
Next
number.
benchmark's 10 subscribers. Hey, that's where it starts, man. A lot of the podcasts I watch have just a few thousand, and those are a few thousand dedicated people.
Some of our videos are
and want to have a conversation, and that's
some
what
of
we
our
want to do.
videos. We're up to 30
We want to have a
views on some of
conversation
those.
about this.
Yeah. I would love to see comments from anyone who wants to give them. I agree with us, disagree with us, fucking flame us. I'll read it. I might not respond.
I'll read it. I'll respond back. I've been around on the internet for a while, bro. I know how to handle myself. Bring it, bitch.
It's true. I'm in my fucking 40s. I'll fire back.
All right. You'll be like, what's his name? Gerald Broflovsky. Remember that episode of South Park where he was, I forget his handle, but it was just something like Skank Girl 31 or something. But he was pissing the whole town off.
I was thinking of Rick and Morty, where it's like, remember that time where someone called you stupid, you replied, then you sat up all night hitting refresh.
That's true. All right, man. You have a good one. We'll see you.
All right. Good night, everyone. Bye. Over here. Pew.